You're listening to
and such a short amount of time to do it in. We were really
a Mamma Mia podcast.
Do you know that I never have notes?
Yeah.
But today, because there are some specific things that I want to ask you about and I don't want to get them wrong, I've got some.
That's exciting.
But I never usually use notes.
Resilience is so hot right now. No, really it is.
Oh, shit, can I...
And for good reason.
Yes.
There's a lot going on. Everyone wants to be more resilient. And you know who is stressing the most about resilience? People who have kids. But there's a bit of a problem with this. Because if every generation of parents get a memo, ours said that we must make sure nothing bad ever happens to our kid. No bad feeling, no bad experience, nothing negative, not ever. They must somehow glide through life untouched by life. Of course, that's impossible. And yet we're told that it is our key performance indicator as a parent. Protect your kid from all of the bad. And the result? Well, we've got parents who believe it is their top priority to clear all obstacles from the paths of their children. Not only are we terrified of them tripping over, we don't even want them to have to walk around the obstacles, because that might make them feel unhappy or tired or stressed or inconvenienced.
What is your child learning by you doing this for them?
From Mamma Mia, I'm Mia Friedman, and you're listening to No Filter, an interview podcast with people who tell their stories very candidly and aren't afraid to be vulnerable. Today, raising kids feels so much more complicated than it was for our parents and grandparents. There's social media and kids are glued to their phones, and parenting has somehow become an extreme sport while kids are bubble wrapped to protect them from, well, everything. My guest today, well, she knows all about that. Daisy Turnbull is an author and the Director of Wellbeing at St Catherine's Secondary School in Sydney. She's also a mother to a 7-year-old, Jack, and Alice, who is 4, and she's written a best-selling book about the surprising connection between risk and resilience. If you've ever had the thought, kids today are just so soft, well, you're not wrong. And Daisy is going to explain why. Here's my chat with Daisy Turnbull. Daisy, you like to crochet and I like to do puzzles. So as one mad risk taker to another, I'm really looking forward to our chat about risk taking.
I was going to ask you if I could crochet during this podcast, but I thought I might get in trouble.
Look, I would do puzzles now if I could. A little bit harder to transport than crochet. But first of all, I want to set the scene a little bit. How do you think parenting's changed over the last 40 years, say since I'm a bit older than you, but I grew up in the 70s. You grew up in the
80s.
Thank you. Hoped you weren't going to say 90s. And you've got little kids now. I've got slightly older kids now. How do you think things have changed?
I think there's a lot more fear associated with parenting, and there's a lot more kind of KPIs. There's a lot more, competitiveness, and that has come from some really good places. Like we know that in the early 90s there were increased risks of kidnapping in the UK and in the US, and that filtered through to Australia. But that fear is gone now. Like we know we are in a much safer society than we were 30 or 40 years ago.
Were there increased risks, or were there just a couple of really high-profile cases like the Maddie McCann case?
Yeah.
That made everyone terrified?
Well, if anything, the Maddie McCann case was after that, I think. Like this was like earlier than that. But I think, you have a few high-risk cases, and what happens is parents think worst first. So think, well, what's the worst thing that could possibly happen? And now I'm going to plan my life around that. And you can't do that. We know that kids are safer now. So something I talk about in the book, which I found really interesting researching, was, do you remember when we were kids there were those safe houses? Like the little sign, it was the
Neighbourhood watch.
Neighbourhood watch.
Yeah.
They don't exist anymore. And the reason is because kids are not outdoors anymore. So they didn't need the signs because the kids weren't outside. And so it was kind of a chicken and an egg thing. So I do think parenting has become a lot more fear-based, and it's a lot more competitive than it was when our parents were raising us.
Resilience is so hot right now. We need to be more resilient. Our kids need to be more resilient. You've got Ita Buttrose talking about young people in the workforce need to be more resilient. What actually is resilience the way you understand it?
So resilience to me is not about always being happy or not being upset when things happen. You can get upset. You can totally have nights where you go, I just want to sit on the couch and watch TV and eat dumplings, just hypothetically. It's about recognising that things can and will get better and having that optimism that things will get better. if you don't have hope or optimism that you or things will get better, then it's very hard to pull yourself out of a dark place.
You talk in the book about fragility and also anti-fragility. Can you explain the difference between those two things?
Yeah, so this is an idea of a statistician and a researcher called Nicholas Nassim Taleb. He has a book called Anti-Fragile, and he basically says, we know that a glass of wine is fragile. We know that if you drop it, it will break and never be put back together. And we know that a sippy cup is resilient. You drop it, it stays the same. You can drop it 1,000,000 times, it'll always stay the same. But humans are actually more than resilient. We actually get stronger when bad things happen to us. We do.
What does not kill us
What
makes us
does not kill
stronger.
us makes us stronger. Not in that traumatizing, I walked 10 miles in the snow to school every day.
I did.
Way. Yeah, it's a big snowy hill on the way in our area.
A lot of snow.
A lot of
in
snow.
Sydney.
A lot of snow in
Near
Sydney.
the beach.
But it is that idea of actually, it's not just that resilience is what we want. We actually want to recognise that we are anti-fragile and we get stronger as we get older through experiences.
I asked you before about how parenting's changed over the last 40 years. What I should have asked you is, how has the experience of being a kid changed?
Yeah, and hugely. And I think we see that as parents when we go, I used to be able to do that when I was your age. Like, how come you can't do that?
Yeah.
And I think kids aren't as good at meeting new people. It's that idea of walking up and starting conversations, like the way little kids do at playgrounds. But if you don't give them that time to go out and meet other kids, they don't learn how to do that. And that actually translates into huge issues later on in life, because if you don't know how to make friends, you don't know how to flirt, you don't know how to date, like all of these things. And I think also for kids, they don't develop their own risk profile. So they don't know what their limits are if their parents are always stopping them at their limits. If the parents are always stopping them at the parents' limits, the kids don't learn their own limits.
Explain that a bit more. Can you give me an example?
I can. I was sitting at Bondi Beach with a girlfriend and we were watching just people walking up and down the promenade. And there was a little kid, maybe 3-ish, on a scooter. And they were scootering and I just heard the mother scream, stop, stop, and ran up to the kid and you've gone too far, you've gone too far. Kid was really, I would say, not that far. But more importantly, the kid was fine. But then when it heard its mum yell, it got scared. And so that kid is now not worried about going too far, but about their mum getting angry at them. And actually, a better experience would have been like Bondi Promenade, no cars, no risk of, anything too bad happening.
Can't get lost.
Can't
it's a
get lost.
line.
It's a straight line. If the kid stopped, turned around, went, oh my goodness, I can't see mummy or daddy. This is scary. That kid learns more from that experience than being told to stop by the mother. So you kind of need kids to figure out what their lines are themselves. And talk to them. If that kid's line is like, I'm just going to scooter all the way to Bronte, then yeah, you have a bad problem. But like that kid would have stopped. And then you can talk about what the kid's limit is rather than just focusing on your own limits.
That's so interesting. I mean, it's such a cliched thing to say, I played out on the street with my friends and I didn't come home until the sun went down and all of those things.
We all forget that was only ever in winter. Sort of like dark by 5.
That's so true. And, I've heard it said that history is told by the victors or the survivors. So while there was much more of a hands-off approach to parenting, perhaps when I was growing up in the 70s and the 80s, and you were expected to be much more self-sufficient and resilient as a kid, I once heard Richard Glover, he wrote a book about his very disturbing childhood, and he said that there were some kids who did run off and play in the forest or went to Sunday school and some of them were molested or some of them bad things did happen to them. And because parents were so hands-off at that time, perhaps those kids didn't feel able to speak to their parents. So he said we can often romanticize a lack of supervision. What do you think about that?
I think there's definitely a lot of truth in that. One thing I say with the book is it's about kids that are overparented. So this is not a book to give helicopter parents or snowplow parents or lawnmower parents. It's not for the kid who has really hands-off parents. But another thing that I think is important in this book is talking to your kid about their own psychological safety.
What does that mean?
So I think one of the risks is to order their own baby chino. And by getting your kid to go up and say, can I have baby chino or can I get a bottle of milk or whatever it is, they learn that inherent trust we have in society with some people, shopkeepers and bus drivers and that kind of thing. And they learn when they feel safe and hopefully they start to understand when they don't. So it's about understanding that themselves. If you don't ever let them go to the shop or get the bus, then they don't know what's safe and what isn't. And it's hard for them to develop that sense of their own psychological safety.
So like their gut instinct.
Yeah.
So if we're always there to say, you're safe, you're not safe, you can do this, you can't do this, and usually you can't do this, they'll never develop that sense of their
trusting
own
their gut.
limitations. So tell me about the different types of risks that kids can take that you lay out in the
So
book.
in the book, I talk about physical risks, so climbing trees, riding a scooter, that kind of stuff, the stuff that might lead you to the ER, but very slow chance of you ending up in the ER. And I think that's the important thing to think about. We often talk about, climbing trees being dangerous, but actually the research around it is they say, I think it's like 15% of kids get hurt, but they don't differentiate between a Band-Aid or hospital. So it's actually like, less than 1% of kids will actually go to hospital, but
After
40%
climbing a tree.
After climbing a tree. But heaps of kids will need a Band-Aid or an icy pole or something.
Yeah.
And then you've got character risks, so the risks that help you develop as a person.
What are some examples of those?
Sometimes they cross over with also social risks, but like learning to have an argument. If you lose a toy, it's gone. That's a really basic but important thing to learn as a kid.
Yeah.
If you lose, I remember my son took a little Octonaut Paizo toy to daycare one day and I said, dude, hot tip, you're probably going to lose that. He was like, no, I won't. And then, of course, I get to daycare, lost toy, and I can still reference it now. 5 years later, I can be like, dude, remember Paizo? And he's like, yep, I won't take that to the park. It's probably losing.
So another parent, and I know parents who've done this, and I could be one of them, will have bought, he's attached to Paizo, so I'm going to go out and I'm going to buy 8 Paizos and I'm going to put them in the cupboard. And I had one friend whose daughter accidentally, she had this particular doll that she loved, and she accidentally opened the cupboard one day and there were 10 of the dolls in the cupboard, and it just freaked her out so much she just closed the cupboard and they never spoke of it again. I get the thinking behind that, but what you're saying is that it robs the child of the chance to learn consequences.
So I will say my daughter Alice, when she was really little, got totally attached to one of those, those jelly cat bunny rabbits with the blanket attached.
Yes.
And so we do have heaps of them.
Yeah.
And we've got 2 brown ones and 1 blue one and 1 pink one. But now she differentiates between them. She's like, no, I want the brown one with the not soft head.
So she knows if she loses the brown one with the not soft head,
it's gone forever.
There's others, but that one's gone.
That one's gone.
And did you deliberately do that? Buy different ones?
Yeah, just so we kind of could keep count easily.
Yeah.
Because if you had 7 brown ones, you kind of don't actually line them all up for a census.
So what's a social risk? An example of that?
A social risk would be learning that not everyone likes you. Sorry. I like you. I think you're amazing.
I don't mean for me.
Yeah.
Have you been on Twitter? I've learnt that a long time ago. But for kids,
huge.
The thought of my child having to learn, but then that does happen, doesn't it?
It does happen. And also your kid doesn't like everyone.
And you don't have to.
And that's such an easy conversation to have because your kid comes home and is like, oh, Joe Bloggs is really annoying. He's like, oh, do you think maybe they might find you annoying? And I think it's a really important thing to learn because you shouldn't put your value in how other people see you. And also, you still have to work with people. You still have to be nice to people. You have to just get along, but you don't have to be best friends with everyone.
So that's an example of a social risk. So we've gone through physical,
character,
social,
parenting.
What's a parenting risk?
The risks we have to take as parents.
What would be one of those?
Leave your baby with a, grandparent to go out for dinner. Or
I like that one.
Yeah. Or let them level up in their own time, I really like. So if your kid can put their shoes on or has put their shoes on in the past, but you go back to putting their shoes on because you're always in a rush, that's actually an incredibly frustrating thing for a kid to have happen. And the way I relate it is it's kind of like if your boss says, you're now in charge of filling the glasses of water. And you're like, okay, I'm filling glasses of water. That's my job. And then they just come and start filling the glasses of water. You'd be so annoyed.
It's like job robbing.
And you lose your autonomy and you lose your ability to develop skills. And I think that that's a really important thing as parents. You need to remember your role is to effectively work yourself out of a job.
You've got more than one child.
I have 2 children.
Do you find that parents are much less likely to take risks with firstborns than they are with subsequent children, and they get increasingly more comfortable with taking risks the more children they have?
Yes, I do. And that has been my personal experience. And I know it's been yours. And I also know
Hashtag third child.
Hashtag third child. But actually what's really annoying is in researching the book, it's actually quite hard to find clear research that says that, younger children are better or smarter or whatever, because I don't know, I assume there's like a big brother lobby or like eldest sibling lobby that shuts down the research. No, like I think
Big brother, yeah.
Big brother, like just stopping the research. No, but like it is. Sometimes it shows this, but another times it shows that first children are smarter because they're probably read to more.
Yeah.
Than, all of that. But I love, and I think you shared it, Seth Meyers has this quote saying third kids, they just do their own thing. Like they make their own smoothies and it's true. Like
from a blender that they bought on eBay and you're like, who even are you and where did you get that
where
blender?
did you get that blender? Oh, I got it from my job at the news agency. You have a job?
It's like you're 5.
Yeah, exactly. So I think younger kids do that. And that's because they're given more of a chance because you just don't focus on them as much. And also they learn from their elder siblings.
So this is when I realised the change in my parenting. And there was an 11-year gap between my first and my thirds, with another one in the middle. But I remember my first child didn't catch the bus home from school until, I don't know, high school maybe. My third child, he was at a friend's house and the mum texted me and I was at work and said, oh, I've got to drop Remy home. Is there anyone at home? And I just texted back without even thinking about it, saying no, but he knows the code for the gate and he can go through the dog door. And she was like, cool, sweet. And it was also her third child that he was friends with. So she was like, yep, that's how I roll. I straight away found with my third child the difference. Like I needed to make a WhatsApp group with the other mothers of third children.
Yeah.
Even though I hadn't actively sought them out, it was no coincidence that the mothers whose parenting styles I most gelled with were those who had 2 or 3 children. And I think the firstborns, I was a very different mother the first time around.
So I think I've been quite similar, but actually my kids are quite different. So Jack is more willing to take risks and really wants to do that, whereas my youngest Alice isn't like begging to, go down the street or do stuff on her own. So I do think that there's an element of the type of kid you have as well.
That's 100% true, and I was going to ask you about that. I always assumed I would have risk-taking kids, and my first couple of children were not risk takers. They were very, very cautious, and they remain very cautious. Third is a little bit different. But how much of it is nature and how much of it is nurture around the innate desire for risk?
I actually don't know. Like, I wish I did, but I think that a lot of it is what they're allowed to do. So the opposite question to that is we know that kids are getting more anxious and anxiety is on the rise. And part of that is because anxiety is fear of things, of doing things. And if they're not given the chance to do things, there is more anxiety. I don't think it's that if you let your kids do these risks, they will become riskier. It's more that they won't be as anxious as other kids might be, but also they will understand risk.
And they'll be better able to manage risk
and
metabolize it and
totally
recognize their limits. I once heard an interview with some expert and they were talking about the rate of, there'd been a whole lot of crashes with teenage kids, drink driving accidents or car accidents. They might not have even been drink driving. And these kids tragically had been killed. And this expert was saying, look, this generation of kids are helicopter parented. We don't let them have any risk. And then when they turn 18, we say, here's your license and you can drink alcohol. And they're not able, because they've had no experience, they haven't developed that risk muscle over their lives. They don't know how to manage those two things because they're two massive risks.
Yeah.
Here's a vehicle and here's alcohol. Or even just one of those things is a massive
one of those
risk.
things is massive. But I also think, Mia, take it further. Like, you have been helicopter parented your whole life. Now here's a baby. Go look after that baby. Like when they have become
what
parents.
do you mean? What?
Well,
So
like,
what?
like if you have a kid who's been helicopter parented the whole time, and then they have kids, how are they going to raise their kids if they've only ever known helicopter parenting?
I was raised pretty free range, and the most famous example of free range parenting in the modern world, I was going to say, in modern times,
after
was
the wheel.
Lenore. You quote her in the book, Lenore
Skenazy.
who. Can you just tell the story about what happened to her?
She's amazing. So she had a son who I think was about 11 or 12, and he was obsessed with public transport. And so she was like, okay, well, why don't you, here is a map and here's some money, and get the bus or the subway back home.
She lived in New York.
So it's like, it's a big city, but he'd also lived there his whole life. He understood the subway map, all that. It was his thing. So anyways, she wrote an article for the newspaper the next day going, I let my kid get the train and it was so great and he loved it. And then she was absolutely lambasted. She was called America's worst mother. And so then she was like, well, no, I'm not. Like,
I think someone
did
called child services
Yeah.
maybe.
And there was
Yeah.
another case, there was another woman who had that happen where she left her kid in the car so she could run in and get headphones for the flight.
And the kid was like 12.
Kid was like 12 and sitting in the car with the window down, and she then flew, and when she got to her state, she found out that the police in the previous state, went to her parents' house and said, your daughter broke the law. It's that ability as a parent to kind of stand up for yourself and go, no, I didn't do the wrong thing. You might be judging me, but I didn't do the wrong thing. And also not knowing what the wrong thing is. Like, where is the wrong thing?
Who defines what the wrong thing
Who
is?
defines? So actually on the Roads and Maritime Services website, RMS website in New South Wales, it has this thing saying, you should hold your child's hand walking down the street until they're 12. And like... Like, that's not, you have to, but it's a suggestion. My son's going to be taller than me by his 8th birthday. I'm not holding his hand walking down the street.
Well, he won't. He'll refuse.
No, exactly.
As well. That happens.
That happens. Like, yeah, I'm so lucky that my youngest Alice still wants to hold my hand, but that's going to stop.
It's so beautiful when they do.
I know, and then it stops.
It does stop.
But I think that that's the thing. Like, we don't know where the law starts and where judgment starts. And judgment is a lot more conservative about the law on a lot of these things.
It's interesting. There's research that shows that mothers that work outside the home spend more time with their children and actively engage with their children than stay-at-home mothers did a generation ago. That, to me, speaks of our new definition in society of what a good mother is that whoever's with their child the most hours of the day wins.
Yeah.
Parenting. And I should say that's not what a good father looks like necessarily in our eyes, but that's what we're led to believe makes a good mother. And is part of that just not being able to release the bonds? Like, if you're always helicoptering around your child, is that part of the problem?
I think so. And I think also it goes back to that competitiveness that you might have with other mums. So even though you work, if you've got friends who don't work, then you feel like they're getting to every event and doing everything. You can't do it all. And I also think it's about having that conversation with your kid. Like saying, I work so that we can, live in a nice house and go on holidays and do these things,
I also add to that, I work because I really love it.
Yeah.
And I know not everyone does.
No, it's
but I
true.
think that there's that narrative that it's like I only work because I have to. And if I won the lottery, I would stop.
So I was
And for
having
some people
this-
that's true, but for others it's not.
So I was having this conversation with a friend saying, we're always saying to our kids, it's just work. Like, you get a phone call or an email, it's just work. It's not just work. Work is important and it gives us purpose and it's what we love doing. And I think that it's important to show that to kids as well.
You're listening to No Filter with Daisy Turnbull. You work with teenage girls. You work as a teacher and the head of wellbeing in a girls' school. Can you tell me the difference that you see in girls by the time they hit teenagehood, the ones that understand about managing risk and the ones that don't? Can you pick the kids who've been helicopter parented?
You can. And it's actually the thing at the moment is that what you notice is the kid who hasn't been.
Is that the exception
Yeah.
rather than the rule?
Yeah.
And so what does that kid look like?
That kid has stuff for class and, they're often actually more organised and they're able to communicate better if they, haven't done something. Like, I haven't done my homework because I had this and this. They're willing to front up with things if they've made mistakes. They often do more things as well. Like, they might do music and they might do sport and that kind of thing. And you might think, that kid's probably got a helicopter parent, but it's them choosing it and it's that intrinsic motivation rather than an external, mum and dad say, I have to do this musical instrument.
Is it true that I've heard other teachers at schools say that parents will ring and say, my daughter's got a detention, but actually it was my fault because I got her to school late, so can I take the detention, or trying to get her out of it, or him?
Yeah, I've had that conversation.
And what do you say?
We have had Dr. Judith Locke, who's an amazing psychologist, come and talk to our staff, and she also talks to our parents. And she just says, to say, look, what is your child learning by you doing this for them? Like, that's the thing. Like, this is a tricky thing that we all need to learn as adults eventually. So learning to turn up on time is part of life. And, parents don't need to sit detention, and they never have. I'd never let a parent sit at detention. But it's more like, what is your kid learning by letting you get them out of detention?
Yeah. Because that to me is just such a fascinating syndrome. And I sound judgmental, but I know that I've fallen into similar things myself, not as far as asking if I can sit detention, but my kid won't have done their homework or whatever. So they'll like, but, can you write a note to say that I was not feeling well last night? And not necessarily a lie, but I'm like, well, no, if you were sick last night, you just have that conversation.
Yeah, exactly.
But I'd like to say, on occasion I have written a note or, driven the lunch in or driven in the sports bag, because I feel like that's the stuff, if I don't do it, that my kid will be in therapy for.
And I think actually the opposite
One
is true.
day.
So I think the thing is, what you're doing when you do that, and like you say, you do it rarely, is you're trying to kind of get
third
credit
child. I don't
with
do it
your
ever
third
anymore.
child. Yeah, you're trying to do it to get credit with your kid. And that's actually not the relationship
Yes.
you want to have with a kid. I really like the idea of, as kids get older, so this is maybe more beyond this book, the idea of the coaching parent. You're not there telling them what to do, but you're there to help them when they need it and kind of give them advice, but you're not being authoritarian. And I think that you're kind of saying, well, hey, no, okay, you don't want to tell, Miss Trunchbull that you haven't done your homework. Why don't we practice that conversation? Tell me what you would say to her. That is a way more useful conversation to have than to just go call Miss Trunchbull for her.
And then interestingly, I see it at the next stage, which is when young people get into the workforce, and sometimes parents call us.
Yeah.
Here.
Wow.
Sometimes
Really?
parents call our HR department, or I've had emails from the mothers of women in their
that's so
mid
bad.
to late 20s
That's so bad.
wanting to discuss various aspects of their child's employment.
So what do you say when you get that phone call?
I refer it to our HR department because she can deal with it. But I have a friend who works in hairdressing, and he says he has the same thing all the time because he has staff in their 20s. And I said to him, what do you do? And he said, I just put down the phone, which I thought was an interesting approach. But it's that idea of somehow we've absorbed this idea that we have to take on all the risk and all the consequence so that our children will be protected from navigating any negative emotion.
Exactly. And the negative emotions are what make us stronger and better. And it's like Glennon Doyle says, you're actually meant to feel all the emotions, and that's part of life. And this is the thing, like, your kid is going to have a time where someone doesn't like them, or they don't get the role in the school musical, or they don't get to be on the team, or they don't get whatever. If you protect them from that, and the first time they get rejected for something in their life is a promotion when they're 25, that'll be a far harder experience for your 25-year-old than it would be if they hadn't had it as a 10-year-old or a 12-year-old or a 15-year-old.
I want to talk to you about teenagers and screens, and not just teenagers, but younger kids as well. The fact that, when we were kids, and this is such a way that parenting's changed, and I feel, and I know many parents feel so out of their depth on this one, if we wanted to see our friends, we had to go out. If we wanted to do any form of socialising and talk to anyone other than our parents and siblings, if we had them, we had to leave the house.
Yeah.
And so just being out in the world, and particularly when you're at a certain age doing the things that you're interested in doing, you're out in the world and you are just navigating those risks. Now, because kids can socialise on their phones, they're on social media, they're on Snap, they're on all those different things, they don't have to leave the house, and then throw the pandemic on to that as well. Plus, you've got parents who are perhaps less strict than parents of other generations, parents who are more in the friend mode.
Yeah.
And you've got all the comforts of home. And so I want to ask about helicopter children. Do helicopter parents create helicopter children who just have a bit of a failure to launch? They just sort of won't jump out of the nest because the nest is really cozy.
So there is that research. It was done a few years ago, and I can send it to you, basically saying that most kids in Australia, well, not most kids in Australia, but a lot of the kids like at private schools today are the richest they'll ever be.
Say that.
So
Explain that.
Kids who are at private schools today, or have middle class parents, they are the richest they'll ever be living with their parents. Mm-hmm. Because by the time they leave school, buying a house is near impossible, and their parents have amassed wealth or whatever, just have a family home. They don't have that hunger because they don't need it. And so it's really, you do have this case of parents who have worked really hard to become comfortable in their lives, not instilling that hunger in their children.
Yes. And because also, you can stay home and have your boyfriend over, have your girlfriend over, have sex under your parents' roof. They don't care. They like having you around. No one really has to pay board to their parents anymore. That used to be a big thing.
Look, I think with the screen stuff, it is an issue, but it's not going away.
But has it like disrupted risk-taking behaviour?
Yes.
Because there's so much that you can do at home, and parents like it because you don't have to worry, are they safe? Are they okay? Because they're up in their bedroom.
Westfield, yeah.
Yeah.
But actually, that walking around Westfield of an afternoon is where you learn a lot of social skills.
Or at the park, or at the skate park, or
but
at the beach, or
all of that. And you're not learning any of that when you're at home on your screen. They are communicating with their friends. I do think like often they are. But, I was always the teenager who came home and then I would sit on the phone to my friends for hours.
Yeah.
I think that was different because it was one-on-one phone conversations. But I think that they're not socialising in the way we are. And everything's a lot more aggressive online. The way you talk to people is a lot more aggressive. So then they see each other in person and they're like super shy. So I think it's about building in that mix of ensuring they're out, making friends and going skateboarding or bike riding or hanging out even at other friends' houses is an important thing. I'm not totally anti-screens, but I think...
Well, you can't be.
You can't. There's nothing you can do.
You can't be, but it's more just being aware of how it's disrupted what used to be a natural process of, hey, mum and dad, you're great, but you're a bit boring. To socialise, I have to leave the house and then navigate all the risks in the world.
You can stay at home and have the whole world in
Correct.
your bedroom.
That's what I mean.
Yeah.
They can do all their socialising without having to leave their bedroom, absolutely risk-free. And even to the point of what you were saying about social risks, which I found really interesting, and character risks, even the risk of approaching someone or trying to form a new friendship or initiating a conversation, like calling someone on the phone.
They don't do that.
They don't want to do that because there's a risk. They might not have expected you to call at that time. They might be in a bad mood. They might want to talk for longer than you want to talk. All of those things.
And it's funny, last year during the pandemic, I was talking to a student on Zoom. It was like a meeting with a student and she said, I'm just feeling really sad at the moment. And I said, oh, look, have you spoken to anyone? And she said, yeah, I've been chatting to people. I was like, have you actually spoken to anyone on the phone today? And this was during the Easter holidays. And she said, no. And I said, it's a difference. Like there is a social difference between texting
100%.
And talking on the phone. And I said, do a Zoom call with a friend, but if you remove that from kids, because they do all their socialising in person at school, if you take that away and they're just texting, they had huge impacts on their mental health.
I find that too. It's almost like when you just put it on a screen and you do your socialising that way, it can also become a series of monologues.
Yeah.
Instead of an actual exchange of conversation where you are taking a risk and you might say something that someone else doesn't respond well to, or you might say something that hurts someone and you have to see that expression on their face.
Absolutely. And I think that it's a really important skill to develop in teenagers. I would say if your kid has friends, and you mentioned, having sex under the parents' roof, but I would hope that your kids feel comfortable having friends around.
I thought you were going to say having sex under your roof.
No.
Well, not in the park like we had to.
No, that's up to you. That's up to you. That's your parenting style. But I do think if you don't want your kid to be at home on their own all the time and you might feel uncomfortable about them going out and hanging out in a park, let them have their friends round.
What about the parents who are always like, look, if you want to try marijuana, try it at home with us. If you want to try alcohol, do it at home where it's safe. That's a style of parenting that's around.
It is a style of parenting that's around. It's not my style of parenting.
I can't think of anything worse than having a joint with my parents at any age.
I've never had a joint, so I can't even tell you.
It would not be good. Grandma. It would not be good.
No, it would be awkward. Look, I think that parents are maybe trying to normalise and I think that there's a lot of good intentions in that style of parenting. Paul Dillon talks to our school and he talks to our parents.
He's the drug and alcohol expert.
Yeah,
he's so fabulous.
He's brilliant. And he says, the thing is, you think that you're giving your kid 1 or 2, Bacardi breezes to take to the party, but that just adds 2 drinks to the 7 or 8 drinks they're going to have anyway. So you're not actually creating this healthy relationship with alcohol that you think you are. So I think better than that would be to say, if you do that stuff, just let us know so we can help you if anything goes wrong.
That's so true, because part of what I've always thought is that there's got to be some problem solving in it's ameliorating the risk. It's saying, I'll buy the alcohol for you so you don't have to work out how to get it when you're 17 or, I mean, not that we're ever advocating drinking underage, but it gets to a point where you're aware that your kid's probably experimenting and taking some risks. But if you sort of, go and clear every hurdle in front of them.
Then they don't know how to do any of that. It's a real problem.
What about when they're teenagers? What kind of risks can you help them to take? I know your book is more about kids up until the age of 10, but you work with teenagers.
I do. I think a lot of the risks kind of repeat as teenagers. So, have awkward conversations, realise not everyone likes you. If you didn't get these risks in the first 10 years, you can definitely use them later on. Work with people in a team. People are going, group work's not real. No, group work is real. That's how life is. Sometimes
What's group work? Oh, working
in a group. Oh,
and
yeah.
sometimes it's annoying.
And sometimes you don't get along with everyone, and that's part of life.
Yeah.
I think also talking to kids as teenagers about values. So I think it sounds, lame, but talking about what your values are as a family.
What's some examples of values? Do you mean like around consent or around?
Like things like, okay, so in our family we are kind and we are curious. I talk to my kids about resilience a lot. But eventually as your kids get older, their values are not going to be the same as your values. They will grow apart from you. That's part of being a teenager. It's about becoming an adult. But if they have a language of values at the start, then they can use those words as they get older. So another area is social emotional literacy. One of the funniest things with teaching kids about emotions is you actually need to teach them the words. Like if they only know sad, happy, angry, then they don't know how to tell you they're frustrated. If they don't know the word frustrated.
Give them the words.
So give them the words.
a wide emotional vocabulary.
Yeah, so it's like actually being able to recognise emotions is a really big thing. And then understand why they're feeling it, give it a name, and then figure out if it's a negative emotion, how can they get out of it? And I think that we often just assume kids know that.
I like what you say about family core values. You often have them in workplaces. Our family value, or people have family mottos, used to be cool. Not like be groovy, but just like be cool. It's like don't freak out might have been a better one. It's like
good friends of mine, theirs is don't panic.
Yes, don't panic. And ours was just be cool. Just like everyone, just be cool.
Yeah.
Just be cool. I just wanted to finish by asking you about the interference or the impingement of parents into the school space. So I guess this is an extension of what we were talking about earlier about parents ringing and asking teachers, and that extends to employers perhaps when they're older. But like when I was growing up, we should play a drinking game. Or not a drinking game, but every time
in the
someone
70s.
says, when I was growing up, drink. Just don't drink. Just maybe drink water. My parents had nothing to do with my school. What went on at school was between me and the school. And now you seem to have parents, and I've seen this in many parents, they treat the school as their own workplace. And they somehow are so over-involved in everything from who their kid sits with to who their kids' teachers are. Is that a real thing?
I think it can be, and I think it's definitely more a thing in private schools because there is that kind of that element of, they're paying a lot of money. And teachers want to work really well with parents. And there are some parents who, some students who need a lot of that dialogue and that relationship between the school and the parents. I think also, though, we need to remember that we are raising kids to deal with things on their own. And also, if you find out everything that's happening through the school, that leads to really boring dinner table conversation. Because if you know everything that's happening at school, you can't really ask your kid what's happening at school.
I think it's such a good reminder, your book and this conversation, that our job as parents, if you are a parent, is to make yourself redundant.
Totally.
And, I suppose it speaks to perhaps looking at ourselves sometimes if we don't want to become redundant and we want to be the one clearing the way and being needed by our children way past the age that perhaps we should be.
And I think there is a little bit of a fear of becoming an empty nester and what is that going to look like. And so by keeping that relationship really tight and dependent, you don't ever have that happen. But you do want that to happen. That's healthy.
You're not doing your job properly if your child isn't taking risks. And I always say that about screens too.
Yeah.
It's like you can't just go, oh, no screens or no social media or whatever. It's like your child's living in the world. It's like saying, well, some people have car accidents, so I'm never going to let you drive a car and I'm not going to teach you about road safety. Our job as parents is not to walk, as Glennon Doyle says, is not to walk our children around the fire. It's to hold their hand and show them they can walk through it.
Exactly.
And come out the other side.
And I think with a lot of it, we've got to remember that social media, alcohol, drugs, it is the water they swim in. So you can't actually remove it from them. And you've got to find a way to have a good conversation with them, but raise a kid who has the integrity that they know how they'll navigate it themselves.
We're recording this on Friday night. I'm very excited to go home and do my puzzle. What are you doing?
I literally just remembered it was Friday. I'm so excited I get to go home.
What are you going to do when you go home?
I'm going to go home. The kids and I are going to rewatch Hocus Pocus. You know the Bette Midler movie?
I do.
We're going to watch that because I
That's
love
a great
it.
one.
It's a great one.
And then after they're in bed.
And then after they're in bed, I'm going to keep watching Normal People.
Oh,
Yeah,
welcome.
and crochet.
That was about 2 years ago. No.
I know. Do you know what? I held off because I was like, I'm going to read the book. I always read the book before I watch the movie thing.
Yeah.
Anyways, I have not read the book and I was like, damn it, I just really want to watch this
That's
show.
really risky of you.
It is. That is the kind of risk I take in my life. My parents raised a child so healthy with risk that I'd never take any.
Are you a firstborn?
Second.
How? I thought so. How
2.5
big's the gap?
years. Yeah.
Thank you. Amazing.
Thank you.
I hope you enjoyed that. If you would like to read Daisy's book, I have been recommending it to everyone I know who has young kids. It's honestly made me think so much, even though my kids are older, it's made me think so much about how I subconsciously try to absorb all the risk from their life. And even though it feels like I'm doing them a favor and being a good parent, I actually am reminded after reading Daisy's book that it's actually a disservice and that I need to expose them gradually to different types of risks if I'm going to do my job as a parent and make myself redundant. Daisy's book is called 50 Risks to Take with Your Kids. We'll link to it in the show notes. And if you like this podcast, share it with a friend and please subscribe. You can find more episodes of No Filter on Spotify. This episode was produced by Mel Zauer and Leah Porges, and the executive producer of No Filter is Eliza Ratliff. I'm Mia Friedman, and I'll see you on the Mamamia app, which you can download from the App Store.
Mamamia acknowledges the traditional owners of the land we have recorded this podcast on, the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. We pay our respects to their elders, past and present, and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander cultures.